seats up front are not more expensive. So please come down. They don't move. Simone, Rudo family and friends, colleagues, students, everyone, freeloaders, everybody who's here. My name is Kramer, and it's my bittersweet pleasure to welcome you to this year's Memorial Evening. It's hard for me to believe it's been 18 years since Shandy's passing. Hard because I miss her. Hard because I remember her so vividly. She's hard not to remember vividly. And not just on these memorial evenings. Hard when I think of her exuberance and our excitement at that first meeting in my apartment 2 decades ago, when Shandy first presented to Linda Zisker, she's here, Alan Hoffman, Sharon Friedman, and myself her plans for the program that now bears her name. Hard when I feel the knot in my stomach when she pulled me aside right after that meeting to tell me of her illness. Hard when I think about all those students and faculty alike who were not able and are not able to benefit, at least not directly, from her wisdom, her energy, her humor, her stiff-necked determination, her willingness to ask for advice and her refusal to take it, her, Shandy, her unfettered criticism of everything she thought wasn't right, her hatred of paper plates and plastic flatware at program events. Hard too when I think of Shelley and Sarah, not being able to be here. Still, here we are, despite it all, in this very, very traumatic, tragic, trying year, because of all those qualities I miss about Shandy. Here we are to remember her and celebrate the program I know she'd be proud of, her legacy to us. I'd now like to ask Shandy's cousin, Marcela Greenberg, to speak on behalf of the band.
Ladies, gentlemen, esteemed guests, it is my privilege, as we come to the close of this inspiring conference, to share a few words on behalf of the family about the remarkable individual whose legacy this program honors, my beloved cousin, the incomparable Shandy Rudo. As a member of the English department, Shandy founded this program almost 20 years ago to realize her vision of the thriving English language writers program in Israel. She faced early administrative and financial obstacles head-on, declaring, like a true leader, "I will get this done." And indeed she did, with her characteristic determination, brilliance, and charm. She was, from the beginning, this program's guiding light and inspiration. If only she could see all of us gathered here 20 years on, basking in the fullness and maturity of the program that has left an indelible mark on the world of literature and continues to nurture writers the world over in their efforts to illuminate life, experience, and thought for all of us. For indeed, this is what Shandy herself accomplished. She had the rare ability to navigate the world through the lens of literary form. She could weave together observations from different people, places, things, to form a wider perspective, delivered with her singular wit, at times sharp as a sword, yet always with an underlying tenderness. Shandy died from breast cancer at the age of 40. Gone was a singular Weltanschauung and the gift of a friend who was also my family. Even today, it's not clear to me which label I am more honored to display. We shared a childhood rich with family bonds, surrounded by both the old and the new world. Our family gatherings, once vibrant with her presence, now bear the weight of her absence. And yet her legacy continues to touch countless lives, including those of my own daughter and others who bear her name, and the Shandy Rudolph Creative Writing Program. A little context. Five cousins survived the war in Europe and emigrated to Canada to start families of their own. Each had daughters, roughly the same age, who grew up steeped in a way of life that Shandy and I often liken to a Russian novel, full of richness and emotional drama. This singular group of women, our mothers and their cousins, were marvelously expressive and maddeningly all-knowing. Their perspective on things, if it can be summed up, incorporated life's duality, encompassing almost always at the same time tragedy and joy, sadness and happiness, loss and rejuvenation. Of all us progeny, Shandy came the closest to inheriting their legacy. Shandy was a truth seeker, unflinching in her quest to confront reality, however uncomfortable it may be. She possessed a rare gift for seeing the world as it truly was, finding beauty in its rawness and tragedy in its flaws. Her refusal to shade the truth, even when it was difficult to bear, was a testament to her unwavering integrity and strength of character. Shandy possessed, in addition to the original five senses, a sixth sense of intuition, which she shared with us in a style distinctly her own. There have been many couples formed and babies born since she passed, and yet I am convinced that she could have foretold it all. The unions, the personalities, the story arc of our lives. Little surprised Shandy, who had an understanding about life that the rest of us would only garner only through many more years of experience. Shandy often reminded us, though, that there were limits to what we can attribute to history's darkest moments. Once, in commenting on the playing out of some particular family dynamic, she drolly remarked, "You know, there's only so much you can blame on the Holocaust." No one in the family laughed harder at that joke than the Holocaust survivors among us. Among our family of cousins, Shandy always stood out, a person of character and intelligence. It was exhausting to keep up with her in college, which we attended together, and to make sure I read at least some of the books she did so I could discuss them with her. I recall one summer having to resort to listening to Burt Reynolds read Moby Dick on audio tape, which was a brilliant rendition, I might add, during a very long car ride, so I could arrive prepared to discuss. But Shandy also knew how to fuse the highbrow with the lowbrow. We once spent an entire weekend in the country watching and rewatching a dark 1980s satire called Heathers, about 4 teenage girls in a misanthrope intent on murdering them. Many of our conversations thereafter were signed off with one of its signature lines, "I got a motor if I'm gonna make the funeral." This year's conference also takes place against the backdrop of our collective grief. And standing here, I am reminded of the simple truth that from the depths of loss springs forth inevitable rejuvenation. I hear Shandy's voice in my mind, urging us to confront our realities with courage and resilience. Now more than ever, we are in the need of the fruits of the labor of a program such as this to make sense of our lives, experiences, and thoughts, to process grief and emotion, and to deepen our understanding. Today marks almost 18 years since Shandy left us, and nearly 20 years since she founded this remarkable program, an enduring legacy of which she would have been proud. She continues to weave herself into the fabric of our memories and the stories we tell. Shandy lives on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her, in the power of her words, and in the indelible mark that she left on this world. Thank you for honoring her memory with us.
Thank you, Tamara. That was really, really lovely. That makes me sick. Now's the time for the Dvar Torah. And my Dvar Torah this evening has to do with the holiday of Shavuot, which is coming up. We might say that Shavuot is the poor relation of Jewish holidays, the least observed or even noticed. And yet, it commemorates, and I use that word deliberately on this memorial evening, it commemorates the most unique event in all of Jewish history, or in the Jewish story or narrative if you prefer. It commemorates the revelation at Sinai. In Hebrew we call it Zman Matan Toratenu, the moment, the crack in time that we were given our Torah, but that's an understatement. It's not the whole story. It's not what the Torah itself, which we received then, tells us. It was most momentously, most uniquely, a revelation of God himself. And I use that in the non-gendered sense of himself. A concentrated burst of divine presence into the natural world. A synesthetic extravaganza of light and sound, billows of dark clouds pierced by bolts of lightning and claps of thunder and blasts of a shofar rising and rising louder and louder, sounds so loud that they could be seen. V'chol ha'am ro'im et ha'kolot. And then God's own voice, whatever that means. Can't even comprehend that. God's own voice saying, I am the Lord thy God. A moment so intense, so beyond human capacity to experience, to absorb, to apprehend, and yet, as Rovagis Forno, the 16th century Italian exegete and physician, insists, it was a wholly sensory experience, a supernal flooding of the corporeal senses so overwhelming, so violent, that the terrified people trembled and recoiled and begged Moshe, no more, lest we die. A physical experience so paradoxically spiritual, an explosion of the spiritual into the frail, insufficient physical frames of the Israelites, that Reish Lakish, the 3rd century Judean Amora, this is in Tractate of Avodah Zarah, 5a if you're interested, Reish Lakish viewed the sin of the golden calf that followed in the wake of the revelation at Sinai as what the Christians call a felix culpa, a fortunate fall. That the experience at Sinai had so spiritualized the people that they would have transcended their own physicality, would have lost the desire to procreate, would have meant the end of the Jewish people. Something our enemies have not been able to accomplish, though they continue to try. And so, the sin of the golden calf, in effect, brought the people back to earth, back to their bodies, back to humanity, back into history. So construed, if I may be allowed a heterodox thought, the Torah itself that we received that day is by comparison a diminished thing, a compensation for our retreat from divine excess. To borrow a phrase from Yoram Taharlev, Hama'at Shenutar, the little that remains. Now, what is truly remarkable about this remarkable moment, as Yehuda Halevi emphasizes in the Kuzari, is that God insists that this afflatus, this divine unveiling, be not only physical, not a dream or a vision, but also, like this conference, open to the public. Not to or through a prophet or priests or elders, but to the entire nation. 600,000 adult men, which means millions of men, women, and children. Not just the learned, not just the pious, not just those with white beards. That's supposed to get a laugh. And even more remarkable is that Moshe insists in Deuteronomy, 40 years later, that this new crop of Israelites, who were not even born then, that they were there too. Not that they were told the story, however vividly, but they were actually there. Panim bipanim diber Hashem imachem mitot ha'esh. That God spoke to you face to face at that moment. And the Talmud, this is in Shavuot 39a if you're interested, suggests that the souls of all Jews of all times, even those of future converts, were there on that terrifying, timeless moment. Rebbe Elimelech of Lizensk, the Hasidic master, was reputed to have said that he not only remembered being at Mount Sinai, but that he remembered who was standing next to him. And not only that, but as Rabbeinu Abachia remarks, quoting the Psikei Rabati, each of those innumerable witnesses of that unimaginable rupture imagines what they experienced differently, so a different aspect of God's multifaceted reality. Now, for those of you who do not remember who they stood next to at Mount Sinai, we have a show of hands. How many do you remember? For those of you who don't remember, let me tell you that the Kotzker Rebbe enjoins us all of us, L'tzayer b'libo ma'amad har Sinai, literally to draw the revelation of Sinai in our hearts, to imagine the unimaginable for ourselves. And for those of you who find that difficult, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, and this is in Kiddushin 30a, anyone who teaches their grandchild Torah, it's as though they received it directly from Mount Sinai. And for those of you who do not yet have grandchildren, get moving, and even for those of you who do, there is the Shenki Rudolph Graduate Program in Creative Writing, where you will learn to imagine the unimaginable and to draw it upon your hearts, and of course, how to write it down. And in case you were wondering who was near me at Mount Sinai, I saw Bob Dylan there, and Leonard Cohen, and Philip Roth. Way in front of us all, I saw Anne Frank. But standing right next to me, critiquing the revelation, of course, remarking how it could have been done better, there was Shenki. Yehi Zecha Baruch. Now back to my role as Master of Ceremonies, I guess, and on to the main event. To the few of you who do not know her, you can come up now. Marcela Sulak is the director of the Shenki Rudolph Graduate Program in Creative Writing. Her books of poetry include Immigrant, Decency, City of Sky Papers, and soon to be out in July, I hear, Fault. Her lyric memoir is Mouthful of Seeds. That's besides 4 books of translations, an anthology of hybrid literature. Marcela will be in conversation this evening with Iddo Gefen. Iddo is the author of a wonderful short story collection, Jerusalem Beach, translated by Daniela Zamir. If you haven't bought it yet, it's still available, which opens with a story called The Geriatric Platoon, which begins, Grandpa enlisted in the Golani Infantry Brigade at the age of 80, which spoke to me right away. After the first sentence, I said, I love this book. Talk about imagining the unimaginable. Iddo does have a remarkable imagination, and also extraordinary insight into Israelis and Israeli society, and into human beings in general. In 2023, Jerusalem Beach won the Sammy War Prize for Jewish Literature, a prize which was established by the War family in 2006 to honor their father and to encourage emerging Jewish writers to tell their stories. And I mentioned that for a number of reasons, but mostly because I want to encourage all our students to get their work done and get it out. Iddo's second book, a novel, Mifal Ha'ananim Shel Geveret Lillian Bloom, Mrs. Lillian Bloom's Cloud Factory, should be out in English eventually. Also working on it. Also translated by Daniela Zamir, a wonderful translator. In his spare time, Iddo is pursuing a doctorate in cognitive psychology at Columbia University, exploring how storytelling can improve our understanding of the human mind. Perfect. His research focuses on the relationship between narrative understanding, human memory, and decision making. Last month, he published an essay in The Atlantic about his experiences at Columbia after October 7th, called By Any Means Necessary at Columbia, which I urge you all to read. It's my pleasure now to get off the stage and hand you over to Marcela and Iddo.
Thank you all very much. And it is really such a great pleasure to be speaking with Iddo, whose book I fell in love with for the same reason that Michael did. When you open up that first sentence and you say, wow, this is somebody I really want to talk to and want to get to know better, and now is my chance. I've asked Iddo to please start with a reading so that you can all feel what Michael and I felt when we started to read his novel, his short stories, and then we'll start a discussion.
So I'm happy to be here, and I'll just say I'm reading the story Jerusalem Beach, that in Hebrew means Chof Hayam Shel Yerushalayim. Now, as all of you in the audience know, there's no beach in Jerusalem. It's harder to explain it to an American audience. And the reason the story is called that is because it tells the story of a couple, an old couple, that goes to Jerusalem to look for the beach. And the reason they do that is because Miriam, the woman in the story, has Alzheimer's, and the memory that she still has, which is one she keeps more than anything in the world, is her as a child on the beach of Jerusalem. And it goes like this, and it's told from the eyes of Sammy, her husband. When did she tell him about the snow on the beach? He wasn't sure, but it happened here, during one of their first encounters, when she arrived to buy challah at the bakery and then slipped away with him into the nearby alley. That was where she told him about her very first memory, about children playing in the snow, digging in bare hands in search of the sand that disappeared, about older men and elegant women sitting on green beach chairs and in thick robes, trying to sorry, I just want to say I'm dyslexic, and part of my experience, both as a writer, is part of it. So I'm happy to talk about it more afterward. Then bearable chill about seashells that parked over from the white snowflakes, and about mothers shouting at their children not to go barefoot, not to catch a cold. She also told him about herself, the only one who dared to go into the freezing water. She described slowly walking into the sea while chunks of ice floated around her. She told him how she closed her eyes and went deep into the water. She opened them only for a second and saw before her the pure blue she had ever seen in her life. Till this day, Sammy still regrets what he told her back then. It's probably not a dream, she determined, and then added with some certainty. There hasn't been snow here in years, not to mention a beach. Since then, she no longer shared with him the chronics of her first memory. At first, he believed it was only a matter of time before he will convince her to talk about the beach again. But over the years, he learned how stubborn she could be. It made no difference how many times he apologized and begged. She preserved in her silence, even after they came to know each other's bodies, even after they got married, even decades later when they moved into a retirement home in the other side of town. She claimed such a memory is too precious to place in the hands of another, even of a loved one. Then came the Alzheimer's and ripped out the memories one by one. The honeymoon in Rome, the evening in the Chinese restaurant, the traffic ticket they got on Highway 2, their son that died, the taste of pistachio ice cream, the first cigarette they smoked together, the war and the one that followed, her father's voice, the dog they adopted for 3 days only to discover it belonged to the neighbors, the trip to the Vid stream in Engedi and the moment she slipped and fell, their 2 years in Boston, the rundown bathrooms in the Hebrew University dorms, her father's death, the specific way she liked coffee, the opening of Anna Karenina, the day she met Sammy. And I just want to say, tell a story about what happened after the book was published. One of the most amazing comments I got was from a reader who told me that he read the book and he really enjoyed it, and he wanted to bring the story to his father who has Alzheimer's, and he showed him the cover, and before he even began to talk about the book or the story, the father started to be very emotional, almost crying. And his child didn't understand why, so he asked him, and eventually he found out his father was a retired geologist. Like he worked as a young person, he worked in the mountains of Jerusalem, and he had a lot of work there, and millions of years ago there was actually an ocean where Jerusalem stands today, and he said that as a young person, when he told people about his work and mentioning there was an ocean in the place Jerusalem stands today, people didn't understand what he's talking about. So he would stop telling his story, and when he saw the cover, he felt that story was written specifically for him. And I think one of the things I realized with time is that literature in its best forms allows us to give a story to one specific memory, to one specific story, to one specific person. And by the way, I feel in many ways it's what you're doing here in the creative writing program, hearing about how you told about Shanti, that really you described such a unique person in the world, and I think now more than ever, I think we need this unique humanity and Jewish voice spread around the world. So thank you, and I'm really happy to be here.
So you see what I mean, right? I will admit that I reviewed this book a few weeks ago, and it came out in the Tel Aviv Review of Books if you want to hear more about what I had to say about it. But I did want to just point out a couple of things that I thought were important to repeat, even though they were printed. And Iddo studies your research topic, at least according to your bio, is the relationship between narrative understanding and human memory and decision making. And so I felt pretty strongly after reading this that the idea of the memory of the Jerusalem beach so much defines the marriage, right? The inability to share the memory in the beginning, and then his taking her to Jerusalem in the end. And I love how so many of the stories in this book allow each character to live multiple lives, because there is a lot of memory and flashback. There are a lot of imaginations that sometimes they prove false, sometimes true. There are dreams. There is planetary exploration, so that you have Einstein's relativity theory is happening right away. You know, somebody's living close to the sun and somebody's living on Earth, and the rent is cheaper there, by the way, than it is in Tel Aviv. And so I wondered, there's so many questions I want to ask you, but I'm wondering about, you know, this Jerusalem beach, this idea of memory, this idea of how your own research, maybe a way to phrase this question is, how does your own research contribute to the book or compete with it, right?
Sure, yeah. So I'll start by saying that the reason I'm doing a PhD in cognitive neuroscience is a very simple one. And my Jewish parents want me to have a real job besides just being a writer.
They want a doctorate.
Yeah, totally. But really, for me, I feel the book was written before I started studying at the university in Israel. It was after my army service. And for me, I think in many ways, I feel that this book eventually led me to also understand what I'm interested just in the world. And like when I studied in Tel Aviv University in my first year, I thought I'm going to study actually literature, and it was great, but I also found out that there's something about neuroscience and cognition that really tells us a lot about human beings, and I think in a sense that's what we're trying to do in literature, understand things we don't understand about the world. And for me, for example, in this story, I think what I was interested in is trying to convey or understand the relationship between a couple that goes on for so many years, and then again, you have this memory fading out, and what does it mean to love somebody that doesn't have those initial memories anymore, and what defines us as human beings. And I can say that working also now for 2 years in Columbia in neuroscience, there's so many connections between, like, I feel that, like, neuroscientists should just listen to authors a lot more, because I feel there's a lot of amazing intuitions that artists have about human behavior and about how people behave in the world that sometimes I find so correlated with what research shows us. And again, I'll just say, for example, my work is trying to understand how people remember non-linear stories. So, for example, if you have a Tarantino movie that starts in the middle and then goes to the end and then goes to the beginning, I just read like a book about how to write a screenplay. Like, I didn't do my real scientific work, and the author mentioned there that he thinks that people have a tendency of recalling those stories in a linear way, like they reshape the memory so it makes sense. And we actually checked it in a few pilots, and we saw it's true, which is not how the memory models we work with today would predict such a phenomenon will happen. So again, I think there's something about our way of perceiving art and understanding art that can also tell us a lot about human nature and human behavior.
And along those, I need to do this earlier. Along those same lines, you mentioned when you began to read about your dyslexia and in terms of brain wiring and how humans work. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, sure. As a child, I think the last thing in the world I thought I would be was a writer, because I couldn't even read books. I was the last in my class to read books at all. And when I was about 8, I didn't read anything. And my big sister, she was a real bookworm, and one day she just came near my bed with Harry Potter in her hand, and she just announced, "Today we're starting the reading of Harry Potter. Whoever in the audience wants to join us is welcome." Like, I was the only one, and I couldn't say no. So at first I thought she was annoying and a nudnikit retzini. But after the first night of reading, I was just amazed by the plot and the story. And she continued to read that book over and over until we finished. And when we finished the first book of Harry Potter, I told her, "Okay, great, so tomorrow we're here again for the second one, right?" And then she said, "Okay, but then you need to read the last few pages in each chapter." And for me, that's how I learned how to read. And till this day, I feel, again, as you see, reading is not something for me that is easy, but there's something so amazing about it that I found my strategies of working with it. And for example, now even in my scientific studies, when I read a scientific paper, I read it and I also listen to it in an audio version, and then I compare between the two. And again, I feel blessed to be in an age that technology allows me to take part in both in science and in writing. And I can say I also define a lot of the ways I write, because I can give you an example. The first book that was mentioned about an 80-year-old guy who joins the army, it's a story of like 80 pages, and there's about like 30-something chapters in it. And only after the book came out, somebody asked me, "Why are there so many chapters in the book?" And I didn't have a good answer, and so I thought about it, and I realized that as a child, for me, it was so hard to read books that I don't have places to stop in. So it was very important for me to create like a lot of stops, maybe too much. But again, for me, in general, I think a lot that reading and writing is something for me very, it's a connection between people. Like, I know for some writers, it's mostly about the process of writing itself, and I respect and understand it completely. But I can say just for me, the last and most important part of writing the book is getting that feedback from the audience and having like this deep and emotional connection, hopefully, that you can't get sometimes in your regular life.
This reminds me, actually, in a weird way, of how it reminds me of the description in St. Augustine's Confessions, when he's talking about the first time he's heard somebody read silently, or he's seen somebody read silently and their lips are moving and he thinks they're crazy, because reading is a communal activity. And in your books, it reminds me that, I mean, all of the characters are so involved in one another, even if they are depressed or withdrawing, and so it feels like the reading. It's a pleasure to get a sense that reading is a communal activity in your work.
Yeah, totally. And reflecting to that, I also think that a lot of the time memory is something much more communal than one would think. And I think we all experienced it since October 7, that I think we're all combined in this joint memory and trauma that affects each and every one of us in different ways. But I think, again, it's like and any one of us has their specific memories of that day and the past months that followed, but I think there's also something that connects people through that. And I think that that ability to also talk about those memories and reshape them and understand them better is one of the things that I think literature and writing and storytelling can do best. And I think it's such an important process now more than ever.
And I feel we just had a presentation by Israel Story right before this, and Mitch Ginsburg and Misha were here, and they were talking about how the war stories began as a documentation. And we were talking later with some colleagues, and Jane and I were talking, and we were saying that it's not easy to listen to them right now because we're still in the documenting phase. We're not ready to review our archive yet. And this book, of course, was written long before today, but it's come out in America today, or in these days. And so, do you feel, when I was reading it, I felt like it's really documenting a pre-war time in Ramat Gan, Tel Aviv, specifically. And your work has been compared to Edgar Carrot, I think, and I don't know if it's just because you write about Ramat Gan. Not too many people write about Ramat Gan, but I know that there's also a playfulness and a humor here, and so I'm kind of wondering. The place is such an important. It's almost a character in many of these stories as well, right? The central Tel Aviv. And I'm thinking about it as a document. I wasn't born in Israel, but I felt like I could be some of these characters as well. Yeah.
No, it's fine. Like, I'm now in the past 2 years in the US, and there's a lot of things I thought that everybody in the world knows about. For example, what is Golani? So really, like, in a sense, I wrote my experience as an Israeli living in Israel. And only then I realized that there's a lot of things that are not part of that world. I can give another example that is related also to the translation, which this book was translated by amazing Daniela Zamir, that did an amazing job, and the translation was also edited by Dalia Rosenfeld, that I think was part of this program and did an amazing job. And for example, the second story in the book is called Exit, and it's about a family, the father in the family dreams of doing an exit in the Israeli term, meaning selling a company and a lot of money and getting rich and going to the Caribbean. And when you say it in Hebrew, you say the word exit, like in English, you don't say the word in English. Not the word in Hebrew, Yitzia. And I was sure every American knows what's an exit. And then I went to the US, And I talked about the startup cultures and exits, and like people, what are you talking about? and then I realized, again, there's something about like being a fish in the water here, that there's so many things that I think I'm only now realizing the difference, and what I felt is like much more universal or known across the world is my experience. And so yeah, and definitely for me, reading this book, following October 7, and again, it deals with a lot of questions of the place of literature and writing now in these days. And I can say that, for example, I got comments while writing this book that somebody told me, like, really wrote to me a really long comment about and how in no universe people after the age of 50 would join the army. And and I have to admit that my response was, it's fiction, it's not real. And in a sense, again, the tragedy and the reality in which we live led us to see something fictional becoming true in a sense. But again, I feel that sometimes literature is, in a way that you don't expect, allows us to catch something about the moment and place and time that, again, I didn't know that's what happened while I was writing.
We talked just a couple of minutes ago about your reading process, which is very important, I think, in your writing of this book. But I wanted to ask a bit about your writing process, and you told me that there's a story that you would like to, or a bit of a story you would like to read to
Yeah,
explain
sure.
it.
And so this is a story I want to read. It's called Debbie's Dream House. And it's somebody like described my writing as like half a meter above ground. So there's parts where it's like a bit less realistic. So this is like 2 meters above ground. So just letting you know in advance. But it came from a very personal experience that I was after my army service, and I knew I wanted to try to read a book. And I don't know, maybe some of the people in the creative writing program are here. And I think one of the things that I was most concerned about is how will I ever make a living out of being a writer in Israel. There were so many articles back then on how expensive it is to buy an apartment. And it came out in a very different way, but I'll just read it and then I'll tell more about it. So it goes like this. I found the job through a newspaper ad. I didn't even know there were people who built dreams. I was sure it was just created by themselves or something. The first question Bruno asked me is if I'm an artist or an advertiser. I said I wasn't. Very good. They're the worst. They think they're producing movies for Cannes Festival or something. They take 2 months to work on a dream and end up sticking a giraffe on the car of a roof in the middle of the desert. I had no idea what he was talking about, so I nodded. Bruno said I got the job, and then announced that it's a shitty one. You work all night, bring your own food, and there's no holiday with gifts. Are you interested? How much does it pay? $50 an hour and $75 for overtime. I'm in. Bruno shook my hand and then made me sign an NDA. He asked me if I'm married. I told him that Debbie and I are going to be married someday. And he said congratulations and then warned me that even if were being taken prisoner, I can't tell her about my job. Make up a cover story or something. I don't need people knowing who I am and start asking for special dreams for their wedding anniversaries. We left his office and we went to the operation room. A small room, 3 screens side by side, looking a little like a control room of a shopping mall security guard. Every screen here is a customer's dream. We pull, the shifts are 12 hours from 7 to 7, 5 nights a week. He said for now I had to just monitor the screens and call him if one of them becomes snowy. After one shift, I realized it's the easiest job I ever did. that the only challenge was to keep awake all the time. I invented all sorts of games, passing the time, trying to find things about the customers' lives through images that appeared on the screen. For instance, there was one guy who had some kind of technician because he had a lot of electricity device appeared on his dreams, or his mother, or one mother who dreamed about her daughter all the time. And looking at the stream, there was probably some story there. It was nice. Looking at the screens, but I was really kept awake when I was thinking about Debbie, about the breakfast I would make her when I come home, or how I hug her before she wakes up. Debbie kept asking me about the job, but I couldn't tell her anything. At least make something up, something I can imagine, she said. I explained, but I didn't know how to lie. She smiled and stopped asking questions. I'm jumping here a little bit. And Rita was the first dream I ever built. She had just started working in a law firm, like classic music and evening jogs near her house. According to the report, she spent the entire day in the office and then just drove back home. At home, she watched the news and fell asleep on the couch. That was it. And I thought about a few ideas and wrote them on the page, and came out with a pretty strange dream. I had her jogging in the hallway of her office, then a car crashed into the wall and the news anchor stepped out of it. Bruno said it was one of the most weirdest dreams he ever saw. That the whole bit with the car was too much even for a dream. I asked him if he's going to create a new one, but he shrugged and said no chance. A week later, used the same dream again. I continued to build dreams even though I wasn't good at it. For every dream, I got a 30 shekels bonus, and Bruno was happy he could go home an hour earlier. He asked me why I insist on working hard, and I told him that I needed money to buy my Debbie a house. That it was Debbie's dream ever since she was a little girl. She wanted a place of her own. Bruno said she must be something special if I'm willing to work so hard for her, and I told he has no idea. It was around that time that Debbie started interning with some interior designer, and he was a true artist, and she was learning a lot from him. I was happy for her, even though it was hard, barely seeing each other. She finished work every day at 7 in the evening, and so I only got to see her an hour every morning. I didn't bring it up, since it wasn't easy for her either. The problem was that both of us worked, and we still didn't making ends meet. We had enough for a down paycheck for the mortgage, but we had to keep on working like that for another decade. Asked Bruno if there was a way of moving up. Nightmares are 100 shekels a pop, but don't go there. You're a sensitive guy. It will mess up your head. I told him, give me a chance, and I really needed the money. He hesitated, but eventually agreed, giving me a report about a guy who always dreamed about an electronic device. He was 33 years old, a bachelor, and like I suspected, he worked as a repairman in a small electronic shop. 2 days ago, he fixed 11 devices, got off work at 7, and got home for a shower. I asked Bruno whether nightmares request a special technique. There isn't such a technique, he said, and admitted that even he found it difficult to build. He said that once he read a book recommending going with all the demons and monster thing, since it's had a good track for thousands of years now, or maybe trying some Freudian theories to choose something symbolic and work with that angle. Bruno said that in either case, it doesn't always work, so I should just do what I feel. I didn't know how to produce monsters, and I didn't really understand enough about psychology. So the only thing I could tell from all those hours monitoring the screen was that the guy found it difficult to communicate with other people. So I built a pretty lame nightmare in which he's just walking around in the street and everybody around him is speaking in a foreign language, and he tells them he can't understand, but no one answers him. Bruno said he didn't understand what's scary about that nightmare, but he's certainly not going to pay me another 100 shekels to do a new one. The next day, after I punched in, Bruno told me he just read the guy's last report. He stated that he couldn't stop thinking about my nightmare after he woke up, and he was upset that he barely left the house. Bruno gave me a pat on the back and said that the nightmares are great for business. And I can share that for me, the story in a lot of ways is my experience of writing. And I think for me, it's a lot of the feelings that sometimes you don't control the things you write about, and that sometimes very personal and very dark stuff come out and you can't even explain in a way how you did it. And like the first dream and the story, and also my first book, the stories I wrote were really, really bad. They were just copies of David Grossman's books, which I loved, just really lame. And again, I think for me, I took this very concrete fear I had of, like, I don't know, struggling in Israel with all the things that are happening back then, and trying to convey it in a way that is emotionally accurate. And it became a story that is a bit out of the Israeli context, but for me, it's also a big part of it also. And I think till this day, my writing process is also even more less controlled than ever. And I try to, if I have, I don't know, a bad day in the lab or in my life, I try to get it into the story because I feel that's the place I can work from.
At what point did you begin writing stories?
So for me, I started writing stories. My parents, when I was a child, my dream was to be an NBA player. If I'll stand up, you'll see I don't really have the height for it.
I thought you were very tall.
I'll tell my parents, okay. So my parents convinced me that the best way of being an NBA player is joining a physics class in high school. I don't know why, but I thought it's a good idea. No, it was a high school with like the best basketball team. They knew I wouldn't get in. I didn't get it. I found myself in the physics class. And for me, it was like a very hard experience because I wasn't in the place I wanted to be in. I remember after a month we went to a field trip we went out to see like stars in how do you say it?
An observatory?
Yeah, in nearby here in Gefen. Yeah. And I remember we walked up the stairs and there was like this sort of this black button, and it was written very clearly, "Do not touch." And I was so frustrated by that point that I thought to myself that maybe if I will touch that button, I'll go back home earlier. But I wasn't brave enough. So I found myself getting up, and there was like this physics professor telling us about how we have day and night and about the physics world, and I just was curious about the button. So I had this idea suddenly that maybe somebody here is fooling us all, and there's no really like physics laws that I need to study and I hate as I hated in high school. And actually the real reason that we have night and day is because there's a person in Givatayim that his day job is coming very, very early in the morning and just switching this button up, and then the sun raises in the sky, and then he, I don't know, he drinks some coffee or something, and at the night he pushes back again, and then that's how we have night. And I didn't know what to do with that idea, so I started writing it, and that's how I started writing. I also tried to write with a typewriter, because when I googled how to be a writer, I saw a photo of Hemingway with a typewriter and a whiskey, and also it's like, I don't know, 16 years now, so now I can tell that in Ra'anana, where I grew up, there's a specific supermarket and you can buy alcohol with no ID. So I tried to write with whiskey. That was the last time I tried doing both, writing with a typewriter or whiskey, and then I just started writing regular stories.
And you write on a laptop or computer?
Yeah, definitely. An old one, but yeah.
Good. I want to jump a little bit to talk about process, because I do see some writers in here too. At what point did you realize you were writing a collection of stories, and how did you select what goes in and what you leave out?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's definitely like a good question, and for me, I just after my army service, I knew I wanted to write a book, and I thought the best place in the world to write a book is while working in a bookshop, because I had this like very naive dream of me reading, I don't know, Dostoevsky and Toni Morrison a day and writing at night. And then when I got into Tzomet Sfarim in Ra'anana, the first thing my boss told me is like, you never read in a shift. And so that didn't work so well. But yeah, so I started, in a sense, trying to have stories, and I didn't have a full collection, but I sent one story out to a competition back then it was Kramer becomes Mora, and it got to the second place. And then they asked me if I have more stories, and I was like, of course, I have a lot. I have like 2. But I told them I need like a few months, and I created this collection, and that was, again, a really interesting process, what to get in, what to get out. And for example, the story I read to you, Debbie's Greenhouse, is a story that wasn't planned to be in the collection. And I just mentioned it to my editor, Alma Vardy, that did an amazing job. And like, I told her, there's this story, I don't know if I like it. She should send it away, and she liked it, and she said, it has to get in, and it got in. And years later, this story was actually optioned by a Hollywood production company, by Ryan Gosling, and hopefully there will be good news in the future. And so I think the thing I learned from that is always listen to your editor. But no, seriously, actually you don't need to listen to your editor all the time. That's also part of what I learned in the process.
And is there any story that you've left out that you kind of like and it was hard to know?
Yeah, so actually there's a story that is missing in the English translation and is in the Israeli translation, which is the last story, which is describes this, like, you have like a customer service place where people call to with all kinds of things they are annoyed about, and few characters from the other stories find themselves calling and telling about things that happened to them after the stories happen. And I really liked it. My American editor felt it's better to end with the last story now, which is about a child who tries to grab onto time in the most physical way, like just grab time. And I think, okay, I won't.
It's my favorite story. It's the last one in the book, and I would be sad if you spoiled it.
It is a
It's short story. Yeah. It's short, so.
So yeah, sometimes I wonder if it was a good decision. I'm not sure.
Talking about that last story and just about the characters, I mean, because I'm starting to see why people compare you to Edgar Carrot now. So, this openness, right? This the power of suggestion, and your stories just kind of seem to follow the power of suggestion to all kinds of conclusions. I'm wondering, your range of characters is remarkable. We've got the 83-year-old Golani, or we've got the Alzheimer's husband. We have children. We have somebody who lives, I guess it's where does she? I don't know. The one on the planet. The planet's not named, but we have all kinds of characters from all walks of life and all ages. And I'm wondering, is there a particular character that was harder to write than others?
Well, I think in a sense the characters that were actually more similar to me were the hardest to write. And the first story, again, about the old man who joins the army, there's the nephew that was like pretty much in the situation I was after finishing the army, not really finding their place in the world. For me was a hard experience, and I think just trying to get into that experience was something that just was emotionally painful in a lot of senses. And also I think that, again, for me writing has to be something that is playful, and in the end of the day, I think it should be also fun in a way. Sometimes it's horrible, I hate it, but I think it does have to, I think at first I had this image of you have to suffer as a writer and you have to suffer when you read books, and I think with time goes by, I feel that writing can for me and my process, for it to be meaningful, it needs to be also engaging and fun. And so for me, one of the things of trying to write about characters, I don't fully know, it's part of it. But then again, I do a lot of research. So for example, if I have a character who's 80 years old, I had a lot of readers in that age that read that story, and I got their comments, and it was really important for me to try to convey it in the most realistic way I could in terms of the characters themselves.
I want to give time for Q&A right now, but do you mind, I would like to end on one, I'd like to quote Iddo. Do you mind if I quote your social media post? Okay, because...
You can also follow him.
Yeah, you can follow him. But I want to say just what you said right now reminds me of something that you said when you were talking about when you were in the opera, or the theater, the opera, and yeah, and you wrote about this, right? How you were speaking to a friend in Hebrew, and there was a woman sitting next to you, and asked you what language you were speaking, and you thought that was just the polite New York way to say, please lower your voice. And instead, you two got into a conversation. And in the conversation, she begins to tell you that her son had studied Hebrew and German and just several other languages, and was doing a PhD in history. And you asked why he didn't finish, and she revealed that he died quite suddenly of a rapid illness. And here is what, and she adds, maybe you can speak a little more in Hebrew. It reminds me of him. And you said, so we spoke in Hebrew. I don't even remember about what. I just remember the eyes of that elderly woman closed as she listens to words in a foreign language that she doesn't understand. And I, who thought I already knew Americans and still learning about human beings. Isn't that lovely? And so I feel that sometimes, do you feel that you sometimes understand human beings more when you try to write about, or?
I feel that's the process for me. Usually trying to write is trying to understand something that is happening in the world and something that I don't understand. And again, for me, also, everything that happened after October for me, I had a lot of questions of what's the place of writing in the world today, what's the place of Jewish writing in the world? And I think for me, like the best answer I have so far is this importance to, I think literature has the power to convey humanity and nuance and details in a way that we sometimes miss so much in social media and the way people in the world talk and the way people engage in conversations. And I think, I don't know, the most meaningful interactions I had and for me, again, October was devastating and it took me a long time to recover, but the things that made me eventually engage back with life, I think, in many ways, was good literature and good art that reminded me of like other parts of humanity and the ability of people to create a new world from all the things that happened. And again, I think memory, I think a lot about memory because that's what I do in my PhD, and I think what I think about memory is that it's not just thinking about the past, but it's creating through the past a future and knowing how to behave in the future, and by even knowing the tragedies and the bad stuff that happened and are still happening. And I think like the Jewish tradition has this amazing ability of having this long memory that also reminds us of the good things in life, and the insistence on talking about humanity and writing about it and creating it, like in this program. I think in a way it's the best way I can think of to try and find a way to understand this world as it is now.
Thank you. I'd like to open this up for Q&A, and I'm going to ask somebody to pass around the microphone for questions. Thank you. Would anyone like to start? I know you probably want to ask him all kinds of things. You can.
Thank you. In your short stories, there's a lot about cognition, and then you talked about that, but there's also a lot about perception and preconceived notions of who people are, and sometimes in a lot of stories, those preconceived notions get people in trouble. Thinking about the story of the, I think, nephew who just had like a presupposed place for his father in his life, and again. So my question is, what do you take from that? Is there a message that you're trying to send in that, or like what does cognition play into that? How can one who knows that they have these preconceived notions, which these characters often don't, but as the reader we do, right? How does that work together?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and like a perspective I didn't think about that story. And yeah, I think that like one of the things I feel a lot of the times is that we build our like schemas about the world and a story and a narrative. This is how life goes, this is that person. And I think one of the things that literature tries to do is play with that expectations. And a lot of the times, the person you thought, I don't know, is the strongest isn't, or like the villain isn't the villain, or stuff like that. And I think that's a lot of like being a human in the world is just changing that view. And I think one of the amazing researchers that I know that works about how to change like people's minds in general about other people is like one of the things that you can check is how much does people believe that other people can change, and if they don't believe that people can change at all, so it's hard to make a change in their behavior towards other people, because if you believe that one is always like a certain person in a certain situation, so you can't change anything. But I think that's exactly what literature and art in general is trying to do, is like take the pieces of our lives and try to create it in a new light that maybe can make us think both something different about the characters, but also maybe something about our lives in general. So yeah, that's in that point, and the point of a message. So like, if you would ask me this question when the book was published, I would say the answer I heard so many artists say, like, I have no message. I think that everyone should take what they want from it. I still believe it in a big sense, but I do also believe with time, there's a lot in the characters of this book and the book, the novel I published, that I think in the end do believe in humanity and the choice of people to, again, like, I think people can be good and bad, but they can choose to be good. And I think, again, it's a bit naive maybe, but I truly believe that creating stories that allow that ability to see that the world, and not just seeing the world as something that you have no control of, for me, it makes me, I don't know, a sense of security that I'm looking for in the world, and I think it sometimes create a reality that doesn't always exist. So that's just mine.
I work at a film school, and in film school we teach students to make short films before they can make long films. And in the first year they make a 1-minute film, and then the second year they make a 5-minute film, and they progress until, for their graduate project, they're making a 20-minute film. Some of them go on to make features later, but some of them stay with the short form. So you wrote short stories first, and then you wrote a novel. So do you feel the short stories were training, as it were, in order to write the novel, or are they two such separate processes that they could have come out of you in a different order?
Yeah. And I think the answer is yes and no. And yes, because I feel if I haven't written short stories, I would probably never finish a novel, because there's something so, for me it was hard, it was like 4 years of work, not knowing if I ever will complete that process, and not having the feeling of like success or knowing I did it in the past. I think I would just, in the middle, I couldn't see the end of it, so I would stop writing. And saying that, I feel that there is differences between short stories and a novel, and I wasn't expecting so many differences. So when people ask me how long it will take me to write my novel, I would say like a year, and then it took 4 years. And for me, I think one of the things that I learned across the way is that there's something about the novel that just perceiving the structure of it, for me, it took like a year just to get it into. And it was really hard, because I tried to write like with no direction, and it didn't work, and it was so bad. And then somebody asked me to do a synopsis, and I did just like a synopsis of a few pages of the book, and it actually was a pretty good map to work with eventually. But like, I like to say that my writing is a bit like, I have a family from Mexico that have a tortilla factory. And their like unique recipe is like creating tortillas that are almost ready, but then you can put it in the oven and it's like really great. As much as like tortillas in the supermarket can be. And I think for me, like writing is a bit like that. I have like this, I don't know, structure and idea of the story, but the most important thing is also to have that last part that can change and not be like committed to the structure I said like 2 years ago, that's the book. Because again, I'm changing as a person. One of the crazy things that I learned by writing the novel, like the things I thought about the world when I started weren't the same things I thought when I ended it. And being open to that changes was really important for me as a creator. It's in the US. I wish it was here. I love tortillas.
I just want to say how much I really enjoyed this. This is kind of a comment that I want you to comment on. You said something really interesting about writers intuiting what then scientists and researchers then tend to prove. And post October 7th, I've been thinking a lot about the role of denial in our, like you as a neuroscientist must also be studying denial. And so sometimes we can intuit things and know things, but then, like, I'm wondering if this is something either you've looked at through your own writing and in your process, or in one of the stories about this kind of dynamic that goes on with creatives between things we can intuit that could be nightmares, things we could intuit that could be like beautiful possible futures or beautiful outcomes, and then also then the denial in the brain, or where that denial stems from, because I feel this is what, as a people, we're really going to have to work on going forward, is managing this very quick, almost, like you're talking about physics, how fast that happens.
Yeah. And that's a great question that I think about a lot these days. And in many ways, that question is what led me to write my piece in the Atlantic about my experience in Colombia, and where I can say that the thing that was most bothering for me to see is that there were students that I know, that I worked with, that told me, like, there's nothing bad going on campus. And then I would show them evidence, I don't know, videos, stuff, and they were like, we're not sure it's students, we're not sure it really happened on campus. And for me, it was very, again, it's exactly the thing. I knew it happens theoretically, that people have narratives about the world, and like when they have details that doesn't fit that narrative, they don't play with it. But for me, like, it was the first time I saw it in person, and it was people that I really, like, again, students are really appreciated work in cognition, and a lot of their work is about biases, and how you can't, like, have this general idea about the world just because you personally didn't see anything when you walked through campus. Because, again, I think things are complicated, and I don't think that all students that protest against Israel are anti-Semitic. I think some of them again, I don't agree with it, but I think they come from a place they feel it's social change. But there are people that use that, and some of them are students that go for something that is anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, in a way that makes it hard, I think, to be Jewish and Israeli on campus sometimes. And for me, it was important to talk about specifically that issue, because I think, again, if we say so much about our research and about trying to understand human behavior, but then we see, like, flaws all around us in the real life and we don't address them, so, like, why are we doing all this, like, important work of trying to understand that? And for me, it's a process of trying to figure out how can we create a conversation that sometimes can be a tough one, but allows people to change their positions according to the data presented, which is something that I feel doesn't happen, because a lot of the times the narrative is stronger than the reality, in a sense. So I don't know, I'll hope I have a better answer. Over to you.
I think that's going to be the final question. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
I just want to thank Iddo. It was wonderful. I also want to thank Marcela, who really it's been a wonderful conference, and Karen and Vivian and Rachel for their wonderful work in helping us out. All of you for coming. Greta, Simone. Thank you all. Good night.